Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Quick Tie. My name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Board Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. And we want to thank Western Canada Fly Fishing Guide School for bringing you this Quick Tie this evening. Tonight's fly, we're going to be tying up the Koga's Bonefish Shrimp. Now if you're looking at your package or you look on any of our material, it is going to say a different name. It's not the Koga's Hula Charlie. That's the only description. It might have been somebody else's fault. No big deal. Still a bonefish shrimp pattern that we're going to be tying up tonight. I don't want to forget to remind you to like and subscribe to this video. Hit that little bell icon. It's going to let you know every week when we have a couple of these flies coming your way. So I'm going to be tying out of my Season 6 kit. It's going to look something like this. And we're going to be grabbing the Episode 5 package. If you're tying out of our individual kits, that's awesome. And nothing will change. You're going to have all the materials there you need. And if by chance you don't have one of our packages, that's fine as well. Just head over to our website and you're going to see a full fly recipe for this fly. So yeah, this one's coming out of Season 6, Episode 5. And let's look at the fly and then we'll get to it. This is our Koga's Bonefish Shrimp. So there is not a ton of materials, but there is a few here, a few techniques that are a little different than we've done in the past. So we'll take you through it nice and slow, and hopefully you find that you have a successful fly when you're done. Okay, so let's get this one out of the vise. We'll grab another hook and get it fixed in there. I am going to be tying with some white UTC 140 this evening. So something a little bit thicker, helps bind down some of the materials we're using today, like our little black mono eyes. Can be a little bit more challenging to secure with a lighter thread, so I'm going to go with something a little heavier. We're going to come in right behind the eye of the hook, and we're going to put a base layer of thread down a ways. I'm going to trim that tag end out, and then I'm going to continue all the way down just to start here, just laying a nice little thread base for these materials to bind to here in a sec. This will build up over time as we go. Now I want you to find virtually the halfway point in that hook shank. Maybe a touch forward to the front end wouldn't be terrible, but somewhere around that halfway mark is where we're gonna tie in our bead chain eyes. So nothing changes, kind of like our dumbbell eyes. This is just a chunk of bead chain. So it's something that gives a little bit of weight, but not a terrible amount of weight to a fly like this. It would make it pretty tough to cast. So to start off, what we're gonna do is we're gonna lay that on here, right on top of our hook shank. We're gonna do a couple of cross wraps just to kind of hold it in place so it doesn't move. So it'll look something like that. And then we're just gonna start doing some cross wraps. Some X wraps we can call them, some figure eights, anything we need to do to kind of bind that down. There's no real specific technique to the amount or how many, in which direction. You're just gonna lay a bunch of wraps down, do some just around the bead chain, some just around the hook. As soon as you feel like that's good and secure, make sure your thread is oriented back on the far side of the hook shank so it's wrapping the right direction. Just give it a little double check, make sure it's solid. If you're happy with that, try in with this one. And then we're just going to continue back down to the back of the fly. So first material we're going to tie in is going to be kind of right around that barb on the hook, right before that it tips off the other side of the hook bend. So the first thing we're going to tie in is we've got this orange colored glow yarn. Looks something like this. Okay, so what I want you to do, this stuff is quite fibrous, so there's lots of little chunks that like to kind of stick out. Just go ahead and start off by flattening it out. So the tie-in point's kind of flat. And then we'll go from there. So I'm gonna take just a couple of thread wraps back to where I'm gonna start securing this. I'm just gonna take one thread wrap over, and then I can pull on that material, and it'll slide down a little bit, like so. And I'm just gonna secure that butt end of it down, and then I'm just gonna take some thread wraps. Sorry, my thread just unwound on me a little bit. Spin it, tighten it up. Then we're just gonna take some thread wraps up, so that when it's tied in, it's right about at that barb. Take a few more thread wraps right there to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And then when we cut this off, we're gonna cut it just out behind the actual bend of the hook. So come out just behind it, trim that off. This is a lot of things we're putting in here for materials are just really trying to make this look as realistic to a shrimp as possible. So this is gonna be the head of the fly. So if the bead chain eyes are up top, we know that this fly is gonna actually fish this direction, so it's gonna be kind of upside down. But we gotta build the fly in this direction first. So the next thing we're gonna put in here is we have mono eyes. So it's just a piece of monofilament that we burnt the end of. And it gives you a little bit of a black eyeball. Probably something that's not super crucial to a pattern like this, but it looks good and we like to put it in there. So we're gonna tie one in on either side of the hook, and we want them to be on the lateral sides, not on top, not on bottom. So when it ties in, it's gonna sit basically right parallel to the hook shank, okay? So what I suggest is grab onto the eye itself. Don't worry about how long it is right now. Dip that mono underneath the bead chain, and let's just get a secure couple wraps here, nothing super tight, just a couple wraps. And then I can adjust the length and the direction that this is gonna move. So I'm gonna pull this back so it's just about the same length as that cider yarn we put in there. Now I'm gonna take a couple more thread wraps, just kind of loosely at first, and then once I get back down the hook shank a little bit, I'm gonna tighten up those wraps a little bit. And then what I can do is I can go in there to that eye. I'm just gonna grab it. I'm probably gonna cover it up so you can't see it, but I'm just grabbing that eye and kind of bending it outwards a little bit. So if it tip it up, you can see I've just bent it out a little bit. Kind of gives a bit more natural appearance to it. And then I'm gonna take this all the way forward. I'm gonna leave that right there. Don't worry about where that mono goes, if it wraps around the hook, whatever. That's just building a little bit of underbody bulk to the fly. So I'm gonna come back up here to that tying position again. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my other eye. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the near side of the fly. Okay, so I'm gonna come in, grab the tip, dip that underneath that bead chain eye. I'm gonna do a couple of wraps, and then I can adjust the length so it's about the same. Good. I'll bend it out in just a second. A couple more loose wraps as I go back down, tighten it up a little bit more, and I can go in there and I can bend that guy out a little bit. It can kind of be hard to get a grip on. You gotta kind of tip it up with your scissors or something. There we go. So now what it should look like is something like this. Okay, they're pretty even. They just stick out, they splay out around that orange head. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this up and I'm just gonna trim off this mono just before I get to those bead eye, or the bead chain eyes. Trim it like that. So I'm basically just creating a little bit bulkier underbody up to the bead chain. Then I'm just gonna take my thread back again to the tying point. But this time, before I get all the way back, I'm gonna leave it right at the hook point. So we're gonna start working with some other materials here. So you got a whole bunch of crystal flash in your kit. Okay, crystal flash. So we need about a 4-inch piece of it. So you can either fold it a bunch of times, or you can just cut off a chunk of it. We're gonna need 2 of those chunks. Because what we're gonna do is, with a piece that's about yay long, we're just gonna fold this around our thread, match up the tips, and then I can decide where I wanna place it on the hook shank with my thread. So I'm gonna pull it down so it's on the side again, just like we did those little mono eyes. And I'm gonna take this all the way down to that tying point. Now those should kind of be sticking right out the side. Now I'm gonna come back again, a couple wraps, and I'm just gonna repeat that process, grab another chunk. This will all get trimmed up, so don't worry about if it's too long or too short at this point. We'll trim it in here in a second. This time I'm gonna go down the near side of the fly, take it back right to that tying point, and I'll let her sit there. Now I want you to take your thread just to behind the bead chain eyes. So we're gonna go over to our silly legs, okay? Great little legs, not great for hoppers, but great for streamer patterns. A little bit floppier of a leg, and you're gonna grab 2 off your bundle, so 2 full pieces. We're gonna need 2 here at the back. So when we double this over, it's actually gonna give us 4 of these tentacle looking things / legs out the back. So the same thing I did with the crystal flash, I'm gonna fold it around my thread, match up the tips, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I want it to go right down the side of the hook shank. So I've decided where I want it. Now I'm just holding tension, kind of pulling on it a little bit, and just taking thread wraps all the way back to my tying point. We're gonna go back over it one more time and leave our thread right back the bead chain. Now we're just gonna repeat that process. You had that other leg ready for yourself. Go grab that, fold it around. We're gonna come back up the near side towards myself this time. And we're just putting this in at the bead eyes just because we're trying to create a nice, fairly tapered underbody. It's gonna be a little bulkier up here at the head, but then it tapers nicely down. Just like that. Just trying to cover it up a little bit. Don't worry about getting it completely covered because we've got more materials to do that for us. So I'm gonna end somewhere around the barb once I've got that all secured. Now what I want you to do is grab all of the flash and all the legs. We're gonna trim these right now while we have them kind of all by themselves. So make sure you got them all together. Don't pull hard because we don't want to stretch out the legs. We just want to create a little bit of tension on them. And then we're gonna measure a distance that's roughly the same overall length of the hook shank itself. So from here to here, we're just kind of mirroring that same length out here, roughly right about there, and we'll trim. And that's gonna give us roughly the same length out the back. Now we're gonna get to our pearl chenille. Kind of it's what we call a braid chenille, so it's rounded. looks something like this, okay? Now if your end looks anything like mine, it's probably started to come undone, so just trim that off so it's square. And you're only gonna need about a 4 or 5 inch piece, so I'm gonna shorten that down a little bit. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring my thread right back to the bead chain again, and I'm gonna tie this in just behind. Kind of pull that material back, make sure I get a good bind down on it, and I'm gonna tie this in right on top of the hook shank this time, all the way back. Right to there. Then I'm gonna take my thread all the way forward. This time I'm gonna cross in front of my bead chain eyes, all the way up to a couple of eye lengths back from the eye. I'm just gonna throw a quick little half hitch in there, and I'm gonna set that thread aside. Now we're just gonna palmer this back. So we want nice touching wraps. Start with a full circle touching. We wanna cover up all that work that all the materials we tied in, so just nice touching wraps. All the way to the back of the bead chain eyes, and when we get here, we're gonna actually cross over and act like we did a figure 8, like we did with our thread. So I'm gonna come around like so. So I've covered that once, then I'm gonna come around the other side. Cross one more time like that. So we've covered up all of that work. We've covered up the bead chain, so it looks like that. And then I'm gonna continue wrapping in front. Now this is gonna be a little thinner up front because we have nothing underneath it, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that right where I left my thread, so a couple of lengths back from the eye. So we're gonna tie off that material. So remember, always securing our material, we're gonna do a wrap behind and a wrap in front. Once I feel like I got that good and secured, I can go ahead and trim that out. And you might have a little bit of kind of fray there at the end. Just make sure you get that good and covered so it's not going anywhere. And I'm actually gonna bring some thread wraps kind of back to the eye and then back up on top of that material again. Now we're gonna spin this around so it's oriented in this direction, the direction that it would be fishing in. And we're gonna add a little bit more material. So we're gonna go back to our crystal flash again, grab another, we're gonna kind of repeat the same thing we did in the back. So we're gonna grab another about 4-inch length, and we're gonna put these in on both sides again. But this time when we tie them in, they are gonna be on the edge, but a little bit up onto the top as well. So they don't wanna be right on top, they wanna be just off a little bit. Okay, so it's kind of, if I show you this on that side, it's just a little bit cantered to the one side. And now we'll do one on your side of the fly as well. You'll notice I kind of always come back right to the eye of the hook before I tie in the next piece. Just kind of, again, trying to kind of create that more even taper towards the eye. Built up with some materials. Just get this guy in there. Good. And I'm just gonna leave those guys right there for now. We'll trim those up in a second. So now we're gonna go to the last material that we have to put in, and it's this fur material. So you're gonna see that there's quite a bit of under fur in it, but we do wanna keep some of that in there. Often we strip that out, but if we stripped it out, we'd be left with nothing but this really thin stuff on top, which we do want to be involved in this as well. We just don't wanna have only that. So I'm gonna grab a little pinch here, and I do mean little. This isn't meant to be an overly bulky part of the fly. I'll separate a little bit more of this out. We're not stacking, we're not doing anything with it. We're just gonna cut it off the little patch. Those ends should be roughly even or close to. I'm gonna swing this around. And then when I lay this back, I wanna make sure that kind of that longest fiber isn't sticking out behind the back of those legs and that first thing I trimmed. So it could be somewhere roughly in there. We just don't want it to be sticking out like way back here. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a spot, looks good right about there. I'm gonna switch my hands so I can see where I need to trim this off. I'm gonna trim that. Not taking out any of that under fur, I'm gonna leave it in there. And then I'm gonna fix this in right behind the eye of the hook. And we want this guy to be right up on top. A few thread wraps down, make sure it's right on top. I let go, it's gonna kind of naturally splay, hopefully on either side of that hook shank, or the hook point, sorry, and lay back like that. Then I'm just gonna come in here and I'm gonna taper this head down a bit, kind of fill in any gaps that we've created with the materials and the thread, and just even that out the best that I can. Good, I like the way that looks. So from here, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna whip finish. Then we just got a little bit of trimming to do. And we'll add a little bit of something up here at the head. So come in, we can whip finish. I'm only gonna do one because I am gonna add a little bit of glue to this. Trim that out. Now, the last thing we have to trim is this crystal flash. So I'm gonna pull up everything that's in the front here, kind of together. And I just don't want that crystal flash to extend out beyond the back of that hair or that fur we put in. And then just make sure that the other two pieces are roughly even with it as well. Yeah, those actually worked out pretty good. So I'm just gonna set that back down, kind of split it on that hair again, let it sit like so. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in here with a marker and either do this isn't an essential part, but it is a nice touch. This is a pink one. You could also do it with red. And we're just gonna touch just from that front material down. We're gonna touch it with a pink marker as a hot spot. Pink or red will look just as good. Just kind of just on the thread wraps that are at the front. So that should leave us with something that looks like that. Then just a little touch of, I'm gonna use some Fly Tire Z-Mint. So a nice super glue, just a touch of it on those wraps should be plenty. And I'm gonna do it on the underside just in case it causes that to bleed at all. Just a touch of it. And just like that, guys, we have our Koga's Bonefish shrimp. So if you're headed somewhere tropical and you're looking for some bonefish, this is a definite recommended pattern. Fairly realistic, it's gonna fish really well. And yeah, keep a few of them in your box, change up some of the colors. This is kind of the traditional color, but you definitely could mess a little bit with the pearl and even with the leg color. So definitely worth having a few of these in your box. Okay guys, thanks for joining me for another quick tie. Again, my name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Board Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video. Hit that little bell icon. You're gonna see next week when we have a couple more of these flies coming out. Okay, until then, have a great week.